In 1963, Pontiac engineers walked into the factory and drilled 130 holes through the frame of a brand new Catalina. Then they ripped out the steel fenders, bolted on aluminum ones so thin they'd dent if you leaned on them, and put in exhaust manifolds that would literally melt if the engine ran longer than 12 seconds. The cars were so weak, they needed wooden 2x4s to survive the assembly line. Only 14 were ever built. And the last one was secretly smuggled out of the factory 2 months after GM banned all racing. So how did these barely held together machines end up worth $750,000? How does a car company go from building cars for old folks to drilling holes in its own products like a team of factory wrecking crews? In Pontiac's case, it started with one man who showed up in 1956 and refused to let the brand die quietly. His name was Seaman Bunky Knudsen, and he arrived as Pontiac's new general manager with a belief that would change the entire American car industry. You can sell a young man's car to an old man, but you will never sell an old man's car to a young man. And in 1956, Pontiac was the very picture of an old man's car. Sales had tanked. The brand was a joke in Detroit. GM's own boardroom was talking about shutting the whole division down. Knudsen got 5 years to turn it around. He started by ripping the chrome off the cars and making them look like something you'd actually want to drive. He grew the V 8 to 3, 89 cubic inches. And then he did something that changed everything. He threw Pontiac into racing. He grabbed Pete Estes from Oldsmobile to run engineering. He hired a young John DeLorean away from Packard, and he brought in veteran race director Ray Nichols to build a real racing program from scratch. On February 17, 1957, Cotton Owens gave Pontiac its first ever NASCAR win at Daytona Beach, averaging over 100 miles an hour. Knudsen was sitting in the stands when it happened. That NASCAR win lit a fuse inside Pontiac's engineering shop. What started as a few over-the-counter camshaft upgrades grew into a full-blown factory racing program called Super Duty. By 1960, the Super Duty package for the 389 V8 featured a forged steel crankshaft, forged connecting rods, a solid lifter camshaft, and high-flow cylinder heads. That year, Pontiac won 7 NASCAR races, and an ad man named Jim Wangers, who worked for Pontiac's ad agency and not Pontiac itself, drove a Royal Pontiac prepped Catalina to the NHRA National Championship at the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis. This move would come back to define Pontiac's entire identity. The brand that was nearly killed off was suddenly the hottest name in American performance. By 1961, Pontiac was flat out on top. 30 of 52 NASCAR races fell to Pontiacs that season. The 421 cubic inch Super Duty engine came out late in the model year, and when Knudsen moved over to run Chevrolet that November, Pete Estes stepped up as Pontiac's general manager, and John DeLorean took over as chief engineer. The performance pipeline wasn't just up and running, it was running wide open. For 1962, new NHRA rules forced car makers to offer race engines as factory-installed options you could order from the dealer. So Pontiac made the SD 421 a regular option on the Catalina. The cost was $2,250 for the engine option alone, on a car that started at $2,725. You were nearly doubling the price of the car just for the engine. About 177 Catalina Super Duties rolled off the line that year, and every one of them was a weapon. The factory rating said 405 horsepower. That was a flat-out lie, and everyone in Detroit knew it. Internal GM papers pegged the real output at closer to 470 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. Outside dyno testing showed numbers in the same range, around 465 at the flywheel. Pontiac was lowballing the official rating to game the NHRA weight class rules, and they weren't even being quiet about it. And they weren't the only ones playing this game. Ford was running lightweight Galaxies with 427 V8s and fiberglass body panels. Chrysler had shrunk its full-size cars and let loose the 413 Max Wedge with over 400 horsepower in stripped-down Dodge 330s and Plymouth Savoys. Even Chevrolet, Pontiac's own sister brand, he was building the crushing Z11 Impala with a 427 that made north of 500 horses. The factory lightweight wars had turned into an arms race, and Pontiac's engineers figured the only way to win was to do something nobody else was crazy enough to try. They started with the frame. The Catalina used a standard steel frame, boxed for strength. Pontiac's engineers looked at that box section and saw dead weight. They cut away the entire bottom plate of the frame rails, turning the closed box into an open channel. Then they punched roughly 130 holes through the steel that was left. Workers on the floor said the holes were the size of grapefruits. One cross brace was pulled out entirely. What they ended up with looked less like a car frame and more like a piece of steel lace. and the problems on the assembly line showed up right away. The frames were so flimsy that when the big machine flipped them over to bolt on the suspension parts, they would bend and twist under their own weight. Workers had to prop them up with heavy wooden 2x4s just to keep them from folding in half during the build. Picture that for a second. The cars that were about to scare every drag strip in America could not even survive being put together without wooden crutches holding them straight. And here's a detail that shows just how carefully Pontiac thought this through. All 14 cars rolled off the regular production line with base 389 two-barrel V8s under the hood, not the 421 Super Duties. This was done on purpose for two reasons. First, NHRA rules said the cars had to come off a production line to race in stock classes. Second, the gutted frames could not hold the weight of the heavy race engines during the build. So the cars were put together with throwaway engines, driven to Pontiac's engineering garage across town, and then fitted with the real 421 Super Duty motors before being shipped out to the racers who would run them. The weight cutting didn't stop at the frame. Pontiac swapped the steel hood, front fenders, inner fender wells, radiator support, splash pan, front bumper, and bumper brackets for thin-gauge aluminum. The bell housing, rear axle center section, intake manifold, and exhaust manifolds were all aluminum. The radio, heater, sound deadener, insulation, body sealer, and front sway bar were ripped out entirely. Plexiglass windows were on hand for even more weight savings. The interior was stripped down to a bare-bones blue vinyl bench seat and nothing else. The aluminum exhaust manifolds were the single boldest trade-off in the entire program. A pair of cast iron manifolds weighed 72 pounds. The aluminum ones weighed 27 pounds. That's 45 pounds saved from a single swap. The problem is that aluminum melts at around 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and exhaust gas temps at wide-open throttle often hit 1000 degrees. The gap between a working race part and a puddle of molten metal was barely 100 degrees. On a road course, the aluminum manifolds lasted about 10 laps before they were done. The factory rated them for runs under 14 seconds only. On a drag strip, where a pass takes about 12 seconds, that was just barely enough. Run the engine a few seconds too long and the manifolds would start to warp and then melt. These were parts built to wreck themselves, and Pontiac bolted them on anyway because 45 pounds is 45 pounds when you're trying to win. When the Swiss Cheese Catalinas rolled off the line, they weighed roughly 3,300 pounds. A stock Catalina weighed closer to 4,200 pounds, fully loaded. Pontiac had shaved away nearly 900 pounds from a full-size American car, and every single ounce of that savings meant less time on the drag strip clock. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover forgotten American performance machines every week, and the stories only get crazier from here. By the spring of 1963, the Swiss Cheese Catalinas were tearing up drag strips from coast to coast, and the numbers backed up every crazy choice Pontiac had made. The heart of each car was the 421 cubic inch Super Duty V8, and this engine is worth a closer look because it was truly one of the most impressive pieces of hardware Detroit ever built. The block featured 4-bolt main caps, a forged steel crankshaft, and forged steel connecting rods. The pistons were forged aluminum units made by Mickey Thompson himself, the famous racer who had been working with Pontiac's Super Duty program from the start, and who got 2 of the 14 Swiss cheese cars. Compression was set at a sky-high 13-to-1, which meant these engines needed the highest octane fuel around and would knock on anything less. The cylinder heads were large port NASCAR castings that flowed 230 cubic feet per minute. Valve sizes were big at 2.02 inches on the intake side and 1.76 on the exhaust. The camshaft was the famous McKellar No. 10, shaped by veteran Pontiac engineer Malcolm Mac McKellar. With over 300 degrees of duration and enough overlap to make the idle sound like the engine was trying to shake itself apart, air came in through twin-Carter 4-barrel carburetors, 500 cubic feet per minute each, sitting on an aluminum intake manifold with no setup for exhaust heat. Warming the intake was pointless when you plan to run flat out for 12 seconds at a time. One detail that shows the character of this engine better than any spec sheet. The piston clearances were set on purpose at 9 to 13 thousandths of an inch, far wider than any normal engine. When you fired up a cold 421 Super Duty, it sounded like a boiler factory. Clanking, rattling, banging. It barely quieted down when warm. That noise wasn't a flaw. It was the sound of an engine built with just enough room to survive long stretches of full throttle and not 1/1000th of an inch more. On the strip, the results were crushing. Pontiac didn't sell these cars. They gave them away to hand-picked racers and dealer teams around the country. Royal Pontiac in Royal Oak, Michigan got one for Jim Wangers, prepped by engine tuner Frank Redeker. Packer Pontiac in Detroit got one for Howard Mizelles. Mickey Thompson got two, a main racer and a backup that logged fewer than 100 miles. Let Pontiac in Akron, Ohio got one for Arlen Vanke. And a farmer from Morrison, Illinois named Arnie Beswick got one that would become one of the most famous drag cars in American history. Mizelles set the mark first. Driving the Packer Pontiac car, he laid down the NHRA C-Stock class record at 12.27 seconds and 114 miles per hour. That record stood for years. George DeLorean, John DeLorean's younger brother and a Detroit performance name in his own right, ran his Swiss Cheese in the 12.30 range at 115 miles per hour. Jim Wangers posted 12.38 at over 116 and won his class at the NHRA U.S. Nationals. Arlen Vanke set a track record at Quaker City Dragway with a 12.26 pass in his car called Tin Indian III, but none of them matched what Arnie Beswick did with his. They called him the Farmer because that's exactly what he was. A real farmer from Morrison, Illinois, who got into drag racing by driving his farm gear to the local strip. Beswick named his Swiss Cheese Catalina Passionate Poncho III, and in match race trim, he was pulling off 11.7 second quarter miles at 123 miles per hour. He was beating everything Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler could throw at him, using a car held together by aluminum and stubbornness. Beswick's car lasted through decades of hard racing and passed through several owners, from Beswick to Andy Perry in Iowa, then Ray Bisek, and finally Bill Blair, who was still pulling wheelies and running 11 second quarter miles in nostalgia events into the 1980s. That car refused to quit, which is funny for a machine that was pretty much built to fall apart. Everything about the Swiss Cheese program was working. Pontiac had built the most extreme factory drag cars in America, and they were winning. The nickname came early. When word got around about the holes drilled through the Catalina frames, someone looked at the punched-out steel and reached for the obvious comparison: Swiss cheese. The name stuck right away, and it's been tied to these cars ever since. The only thing that could stop these cars wasn't on the drag strip. It was on the 14th floor of GM headquarters in Detroit. GM's share of the American car market had hit 53.9% in 1962. That number scared the top brass because it put a giant target on GM's back. The Kennedy White House and the Justice Department were already looking into whether GM had gotten too big and too powerful, and had even talked about forcing the company to break apart. GM wanted to stay out of the spotlight at all costs. On January 18, 1963, AMC's president Roy Abernethy gave a speech in Detroit, ripping into car makers who had walked away from the 1957 racing ban, warning that their horsepower wars would bring the feds down on the whole industry. Within hours, GM's top bosses called a crisis meeting. 6 days later, on January 24th, GM Chairman Frederick Donner and President John Gordon handed down the order. All GM divisions were to stop all racing work right away. Every program, every deal, every team tie. Anyone caught breaking the rule would be fired on the spot. The ban hit every performance program across GM. Chevrolet's Z11 Impala program was killed. The mystery motor that Junior Johnson had just shown off at Daytona was put on the shelf. The Corvette Grand Sport, with only 5 built, was shut down. And Pontiac's Super Duty operation, the most winning factory racing program in America at that moment, was ordered to close right away. Dealers were told to turn down all orders for SD421 models. Only 88 total Super Duty engines were finished before the axe fell. The program was dead. On paper, anyway. On April 2nd, 1963, more than 2 months after the ban, a 14th Swiss Cheese Catalina rolled off the assembly line. The official paperwork labeled it as an internal engineering research vehicle. Unlike the first 12 cars, which wore a flashy Cadillac special order color called Firefrost Silver, this one was painted a quiet silver mist gray, maybe to keep from drawing any eyes. It was shipped straight to Collingwood Motors, a dealership in Graybull, Wyoming, about as far from Detroit as you could get, where it was raced under the name Tonto VI. If you look at the paperwork and the paint choice and the faraway drop-off spot and the timing, the picture is pretty clear. Someone inside Pontiac quietly put together one last Swiss cheese car after the ban, hid it behind a company tag, and sent it to the middle of nowhere to race. It became the very last car ever built under the Pontiac Super Duty program. Everything about the Swiss cheese program had been built to work against them, and now the company ban was doing the same. What happened next changed the American car industry for good. With racing officially off limits, the guys at Pontiac, who had spent years building the fastest cars in America, needed a new path. Jim Wangers, the ad man who had won the 1960 NHRA Nationals and raced Swiss Cheese Catalinas for Royal Pontiac, pushed a simple idea to John DeLorean. Take racing off the track and put it on the street. If Pontiac couldn't race, they could build street cars that felt like race cars and sell them to every kid in America who wanted to go fast on Saturday night. DeLorean, along with engineers Bill Collins and Russ Gee, found that the 389 V8 shared motor mounts with the compact Tempest's base engine and could be swapped in about 30 minutes. They took the cylinder heads from the 421 Super Duty, bolted them onto a 389, dropped it into a mid-size Tempest body, and called it the GTO. The link between the Swiss Cheese and the GTO was direct and planned. The same engineers, the same cylinder head work, the same thinking of squeezing every bit of speed from parts they already had. The only thing that changed was the wrapper. Instead of a stripped-out full-size car with holes in the frame, it was a mid-size car with a back seat and a heater that actually worked. The first 1964 GTO rolled off the line on September 3, 1963. Just 5 months after the last Swiss cheese was smuggled out the back door, Pontiac expected to sell 5,000. They sold 32,450. The muscle car era had begun, and it was born straight from the ashes of 14 silver Catalinas with frames full of holes. Ford answered with the Mustang. Chevy fired back with the Chevelle SS. Chrysler let loose the Roadrunner. Within 3 years, every car maker in Detroit was building mid-size performance cars, and they all traced their roots back to what Pontiac started. Of the 14 Swiss cheese cars built, 9 are known to survive today. The other 5 are gone, almost surely scrapped or wrecked through decades of hard racing. The survivors have become some of the most prized pieces in American car history. The Jim Wangers car, the one driven by the man who helped create both the Swiss cheese and the GTO, sold at Meckham's Indianapolis auction in 2025 for $742,500. It is the most expensive Pontiac Catalina ever sold at auction, and the third most expensive Pontiac of any type, behind only a 1954 Bonneville Motorama Concept and a 1970 GTO Judge convertible. A second Swiss cheese, one of the 2 cars that belonged to Mickey Thompson, sold at the same auction for $473,000. Both had been restored by Scott Tiemann of Supercar Specialties in Portland, Michigan. The last car built, the one smuggled past the ban, was restored by Riddler Award-winning builder Tim Divers and first shown at the Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals in 2013, where it won Concours Gold. Divers recorded every hole in the frame, every lightning cut, every aluminum panel, creating a photo record of exactly how far Pontiac was willing to go to win. 9 cars survive, each one still carrying the proof of 130 holes that Pontiac's engineers drilled through their own product because winning mattered more than common sense. Anyway, that is the story of the Swiss Cheese Catalinas. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, so click it, and if you made it to the end, subscribe.